Let's do it. Okay. We do have people joining. Let's just give it another 20 seconds.
Great. Let's go ahead and get started. Hello and welcome to the Ready Set Solar info session. Thank you all for joining us on your Friday afternoon. My name is Aaron Such. I'm the Atlantic Southeast Region Director and Virginia Program Director for Solar United Neighbors. And I am joined here by my colleague Sukrit Mishra, who is a DC Program Director, as well as Mid-Atlantic Region Go Solar support, kind of do everything for our programs. We also have our Virginia Program Associate Benjamin Hoyne joining us as well. So we're going to go ahead and get started with the info session and some real basic housekeeping before. We're all pretty fluent in Zoom. The main thing is that this webinar is being recorded. A recording will be distributed to those who RSVP'd after the presentation is over. And please submit your questions in the chat. We're not going to do the join audio version for this one. So this is an interactive webinar, an interactive session. So please make sure that any questions you have, you can submit them in the chat. And then we'll stop and pause after each of the sections to address any questions that we can discuss. So what we will cover today is the Ready Set Solar program. It's a newer pilot project. So we are rolling that out here in Virginia for the first time. We're going to discuss solar and electric vehicle charging technology, solar economics, and as I mentioned, after each of these sections, we will pause for any questions. So you're probably wondering a little bit about us. And Solar United Neighbors is a nonprofit organization that essentially got started by accident. We were started in the Mount Pleasant neighborhood of Washington, D.C. when my our boss and co-founder or co-founder, Anya Schoolman, saw the movie Inconvenient Truth with her son, Walter, and his friend, Diego. And they were so motivated to take action that they thought that the best or the easiest way to take action on climate change was to go solar on their row house in Mount Pleasant. Well, at the time, they discovered that there were some very significant barriers. Literally, the cost of solar then was more than 4 times the cost of what it is now. And then secondly, they ran into what we call transaction or education barriers. They didn't really know or understand the components of the proposals, how to compare apples to apples. So given these 2 barriers, Anya thought she was being a smart mom and saying, hey, if this is so challenging, why don't we just maximize our impact and try to take the whole neighborhood solar? And in short, that's kind of what she did. She or her son Walter turned it into a school project and got about 100 neighbors in the Mount Pleasant area interested in the group, and they addressed barriers together. So they coalesced as a group to get a bulk purchase discount with an installer, and they helped to educate each other. And they started the first Mount Pleasant Solar Co-op, which after 2 years took 45 people solar in their Mount Pleasant neighborhood of DC. So Solar United Neighbors started as really just my boss, Anya, working out of her house and with a few volunteers as a desire to respond to people that wanted to replicate that success stories in other parts of DC and of course nationally. So now Solar United Neighbors is a national nonprofit that represents solar owners and prospective solar owners. We actually have programs in 11 states, including Washington, D.C., and as of this week, officially in Puerto Rico. So I'm going to move on to the next slide and talk a little bit about our impact. We have, as I mentioned, on the ground, 11 states and 2 different programs, one in Puerto Rico and D.C., but we have helped over 7,700 plus families go solar. We've installed about 56 megawatts worth of installed capacity on individual rooftops. Here in Virginia, we're the nonprofit that has installed more solar than any other nonprofit We are over 1,200 installations here in the Commonwealth and have installed about 9 megawatts of installed capacity. It's an industrial level scale of solar on individual rooftops. But what we really work for is an equitable energy system, one that distributes benefits back to local communities and puts the power in the hands of consumers. So we put our theory of change or divide it into kind of 3 distinct areas as we work as a 501c3 nonprofit. We first and foremost help people go solar. And we'll be talking about the Ready Set Solar program today, but it is support with new and existing systems. We are an installer and technology neutral nonprofit. So our goal is to help provide you with the tools that make it easier to go solar. As part of this process, we encourage the folks that we help and that connect with our network to join together with other solar owners. So we provide a lot of resources. We have a listserv in the state as well as part of this program. We do a lot of social events. We actually have a happy hour coming up in Richmond, but we do a lot of things that help connect other solar owners so that they can share their experiences, share their resources, and have a good time. And then more importantly, we help mobilize solar owners to fight for energy rights. So we actually are not an environmental group nor an industry group, but we represent a constituency of people that have solar or that want to go solar or benefit from solar. So the good news about this is it's a fiercely nonpartisan constituency. We have conservatives, liberals, everybody in the middle, but we strictly focus on fighting for energy rights. And since we started working in Virginia in 2014, we've been successful in protecting things like net metering, fair compensation for solar, expanding solar on schools and government facilities. In 2020, we passed a piece of legislation that made it harder for homeowners associations to restrict solar on their properties. So our advocacy really focuses fiercely on protecting solar rights, the power and the rights of you all to put solar on your home and business. So even if the Ready Set Solar or going solar isn't a good fit for you, we really encourage you to join our network so that you might advocate or join together with other solar owners. So let's talk a little bit about Ready Set Solar. And the history of this is that it started as a pilot project in Washington, D.C. a few years back. And it's a variance from our traditional solar co-op model. You might have known us from our solar co-ops, which we've done quite a few. Ready Set Solar is a little bit different program, and I'll explain the details here in a second. Again, and after each of these sections, I will pause for any questions. So you could think of Ready Set Solar as a program that's designed to give you expert help, peer support that is free to join, and that's administered by Solar United Neighbors. We are a technology and installer neutral nonprofit. So I'm going to ask you all as attendees a question. So just maybe raise your hand silently or think in your mind. Who here has purchased an automobile? Chances are yes. And then the other question is, before you purchased that car, did you do a little bit of research? And I would hope you say yes. Maybe you researched a little bit of the different brands or decided what your needs were. Maybe you have kids that you need to go to soccer. Maybe you wanted an economical car, an electric vehicle, or maybe something for work. And the way we see solar is it's similar to purchasing a car. And we're here to give you that help before you do it so that you can make an informed decision. So that's what Ready Set Solar helps you do. It gives you the expert help through the process. What you're going to see when you join the program is a lot of different resources. So when you join, and we'll go through some of the other steps as follows. We're going to screen your roof, make sure it's a good fit for solar, but you're going to get a real exhaustive list or exhaustive set of emails that are going to walk you through the basics to help you understand the process, the components, how it works. And then as part of that, we are going to connect you with other peers. So we have an internal listserv as part of this group, basically a discussion group of people that have gone solar before or that are going solar at this time. So they might share experiences with a contractor, or might be able to answer some questions. Again, it's connecting you with other folks that are going through that process. And then we as a nonprofit, you may say, well, if you're not familiar with our work, what's in it for Solar United Neighbors? We gauge our impact by the amount of people that we help go solar. So this is a kind of a new and innovative program that's different from our co-op model. And our goal with this is to provide you with the support through the process, but also to measure our impact in a way that's a little bit different from our co-ops. And it is, of course, free to join. So I'd like to kind of unpack the steps as I mentioned before. We divide them into 4 distinct sections. One is join and learn. So when you join the group, as I mentioned, we're going to welcome you, screen your roof, and I'll talk about what makes a good site for solar, what a good roof for solar is here in a second. And then we're going to give you the 8 weeks to solar ready content. So you're going to get an email every day for the first week, and then a digest version. But that's going to go through, again, how the panels work, how it's financed, how to look at your proposal so that you have the tools to make an informed decision. The second step is, again, connecting with other members or even with us at any time during the process. If you have a question, you can reach out to us and email us, and we'll be happy to answer those questions. But you have that private listserv where members who are concurrent members of the group are able to share and discuss their experience, plus solar ambassadors. So people that have gone solar before may be in a position to answer a question about net metering or interconnection process or how long it takes to install. And then additionally, you have our Sun staff that's part of it, that is part of this forum, as well as if you reach out to us. Then the other step is deciding. So you have those tools, you can make an informed decision. What we recommend as part of this group, and where it varies from our co-op, is that we recommend that you reach out to get 3 proposals from local installers. And we'll give you help reviewing up to those 3 proposals. And again, give you the tools to make that informed decision. So when you look at a proposal, you want to be able to compare apples to apples. But you're going to choose your own installer, and that's where it varies from the co-op. The co-op has a single selected installer by group members. This is one where you can choose your own installer based on the proposals that you get based on your comfort level. And then as you go solar, we recommend that you stay connected. So part of our work to join folks together is to give you ongoing advice and assistance, but you might want to connect in an advocacy perspective. Many of our solar owners that we help through our co-ops or through this group are in a position to be really powerful advocates. Or a solar ambassador. Maybe you're somebody that can help people in your community go solar just by maybe, we do solar open houses or providing additional information. Again, or you may just say, hey, I've got my solar panels, I'm fine, I don't need to stay connected. It's certainly up to you. So again, the steps of the program, it's free to join. So you're going to join and learn, get those tools to make an informed decision, connect with other members on the internal listserv for the group, or us as Sun staff or people that have gone solar. And then the decision is up to you. So the idea is hopefully you have those tools to make an informed decision after looking at 3 or 4 or maybe less proposals, and then you select your installer or stay connected with other solar owners and with Sun. So a big part of going solar, again, is understanding your proposal. And I'm going to use the car analogy as the reality of the Virginia market now is that there are a lot of installers that are going out and knocking on doors, and that's fine. But my question would be is if you were looking for a car and somebody knocked on your door and said, hey, I've got a single car from a single vendor that I'd like to sell you, chances are you would probably look at other options just before making that decision. And a big part of that is understanding your proposal, how a system is priced, or different components. So in this case, a major part of our work here is helping you understand your proposal. So what does that mean? Understanding the way that solar is priced. So I'll mention in subsequent slides that solar is priced by the watt, not by the panel. but also understanding the advantages and disadvantages of components. So you may have a couple different panel options, a high efficiency panel, or different aesthetics of panels, or different inverters or battery systems. So understanding how those components work, the costs and benefits, so that you can make a decision that makes the most sense to you. And then warranties. What's the typical warranty for panels or workmanship or for inverters, so that you can, again, compare those different proposals that may have different warranty information or packages. And then the economics and incentives. So you know how much you're going to pay, but how does a system pay back? What are your revenue streams, so that you can look at a proposal and question maybe, you know, how a certain proposal presents incentives or the cost of electricity, for example. And then financing options. Many installers will offer financing options in-house, but you may also choose to do a home equity line of credit or go through a credit union. So having those options at hand is super helpful. And then lastly, the permitting process. What's a normal permitting process for a home or residential system? How long does it take? You know, what are the different steps involved? So before I go into the solar technology, I'm going to pause and see Sucrit has been, I think, monitoring the chat, if there's any questions that I can answer about the process.
So far, so good. I think I just got a question about the break-even point when it comes to energy savings and solar installations. We can save that for the financing part, and I guess you can answer it then.
Yeah,
or
we'll talk. We'll talk. So the break-even point of ROI, just so you have, is about 9 to 13 years in Virginia, and then I'll go really into detail about how that works out in the solar financing slide. It's a really good question, though.
And that's it for the chat for now. You can carry on.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about solar technology. And we all come at it from kind of different levels of knowledge. We're going to start off from the basics. So we're going to be working with solar photovoltaic, or PV technology. It comes from two words: photo meaning light and voltaic like voltage, and it converts solar energy to electricity. There is another type of technology that's a fine technology, but we're not focusing on that. That's called solar thermal. That would be using the sun's heat to produce heat for heating water or for passive heat design. We're going to focus on solar PV. And you can think of a solar PV system as a generator with no moving parts, a free source of fuel, and literally a 25-year plus lifespan. So it is a series of components. So obviously the most common component is going to be your panel, or installers often call them modules. And your panel is about a 3.5 by 5.5 feet long, weighs about 40 pounds. And what's important is that they're measured in wattage. So you might have a 350 watt panel. That's what it's capable of producing at any given instant. And it's kind of like the old incandescent light bulbs. If you bought a 50 watt light bulb back in the day, that would draw 50 watts at its maximum. Again, panels are measured in what they're capable of producing at their maximum. But very rarely would you have just one panel or module. You would have multiple panels grouped in a solar array. And your solar array is going to be measured in 1,000 watt increments. So you may have 4 250 watt panels. That would be 1,000 watts, or a 1 kilowatt system. So again, panels measured in wattage, but your array or your system size is going to be measured in 1,000 watt increments, or kilowatts, kW, as an abbreviation. And then before we get into how they attach to your roof, what is a good roof for shading, or what is a good roof for solar? As I mentioned, part of this process is that we'll do a remote assessment. And when I say we'll, it's actually Sucrit or Ben. And what we're looking for is your roof orientation. We're in the Northern Hemisphere, so as you face south, that's your ideal situation because you're facing into the equator. But you can go solar on an east or west facing roof. You're just going to have a little bit less production. What you want to avoid is your best surface for solar that would be facing north. Again, as you face north, you're going to be facing away from the equator, and it's really, panels will still work, but it's not a good investment. The other thing is shading. So this is an art rather than a science, because the sun is at different angles during certain times of the day or during certain times of the season. So we're looking at anything like trees, chimneys, dormers, or other obstructions that's going to shade the panels and going to obstruct the sunlight. And a simple rule of thumb is you want to have your roof exposed to the sun basically from about 10 a.m. to about 3 p.m. in the day, give you that good solar window. The next one, is there enough space to mount panels? So as I mentioned before, you're going to need a roof that's not facing north, that has little obstruction. And another rule of thumb is you're looking at about 200 square feet of unobstructed roof space as a rule of thumb. You're also going to look at your roof age. As I mentioned before, the panels are going to last 25 years plus. So what you want to avoid is putting panels on your roof and then having to pay somebody to uninstall, store, and reinstall them while you re-roof. So we say if you have 10 years or less on your roof, it's a good idea to go solar after you re-roof or at the same time. And again, this is an art rather than a science, but it gives you an idea of what we're looking for in terms of what makes a good space for solar. And I'll talk a lot about ground-mounted systems here in a second. So you have your panels that I mentioned earlier. How are they going to affix to your roof? Well, depending on what type of roof you have, you're going to have a racking system that's going to be able to accommodate that. Pictured here is an asphalt shingled roof, which is the most common roof here in Virginia. But you may have a standing seam metal roof. A good example of those is if you go to the Wawa gas stations. And those standing seam metal roofs are great. They're you don't even need to do a penetration with them. Or you may have a flat rubber membrane roof if you live in a row house. That is very common, or on a commercial property. And you're going to have racking systems that are going to be able to adhere to all different roofs with the exception of slate roofs. So if you have a slate roof, that is a really difficult install because of the type of installation that's needed. Most installers will not install on slate, or the few that do will install, but at a significantly higher cost. So just something to have in mind. This is an example here of a standing seam metal roof. Again, you can see how the panels just adhere to those seams. And they have a racking system that doesn't penetrate into the roof. As I mentioned before, and this is pretty common and certainly applicable to the Shenandoah Valley, if your roof isn't a good fit for solar, but you have some space, you may have an option for a ground-mounted system. And again, it's just a system that racks into the ground. The advantages of a ground-mounted system is if you don't have a good roof or it's obstructed, you can put that in an area that has full access to the sun. You also can tilt them in an ideal orientation to the south and at a perfect tilt angle, and you're not just stuck with what your roof has. The disadvantage of a ground-mounted system is it's a little more expensive because the installer has to design the racking system. And then you also have to look at how close that area is going to be to where you connect your electric meter. Within rule of thumb is about within 50 feet is pretty common, but as you start to get over 100, 150 feet, it's harder to run those wires from your panel system into the nearest electric panel. But again, certainly a suitable option, and all installers basically servicing the area are going to offer that ground-mounted option. The other advantage is it's a little bit easier to clean panels if they're on the ground. So if you got some snow accumulation, you can do that. But we really don't recommend even touching your panels, especially if they're on the roof. So you have your panels, your racking system or your mounting system. I would argue probably one of the most important parts of your system is going to be your inverter. So your panels produce direct current electricity, think Thomas Edison. But your homes use alternating current. You may think Nikola Tesla or Westinghouse if you're a real energy person. So what your inverter does is it conditions the power, and it makes that DC that DC energy from your panels usable. It conditions it into alternating current. And there's a couple different technologies, but they all pretty much do the same. The string inverters are a little bit older technology, more traditional. Now they're mostly used for ground-mounted systems and commercial systems. What you see on the right are the two most common residential systems for residential and small commercial. And that's a string inverter with DC optimizers or microinverters. The advantage compared to a string inverter for both of these systems is that they have panel level performance maximization. The disadvantage with the string inverter is all of the panels were wired together. So if you had a poorly performing panel, that would drag down the performance of other high performing panels. I kind of think of the old Christmas lights examples. If you had one bulb that was out, it would affect the rest of the string. So a string inverter with DC optimizer, what's known as a solar edge, is make sure that you have panels that are going to be optimized. So if 2 or 3 panels of your system are shaded, it's not going to bring down the performance of the rest of your system. The same thing with microinverters, just slightly different technology. But again, what they're going to do is maximize the performance of each panel. So good in places of shading or multiple roof facades. There are also the advantages is that you have panel level monitoring. So when you go solar, and I can relate to this, it is going to be your new toy to look at your app. You're going to have an app that shows your performance of your system, that's going to show you what it's doing each day at any given instant over the course of the year. And so with a optimizer system, with the Solar Edge or a microinverter system, you're going to be able to look at that panel level monitoring. So it tells you what each panel is doing, and it's also great for troubleshooting. And just the difference between the two as they function very similarly, string inverter is still a DC, or the string inverter Solar Edge with the DC optimizer. It has a box which optimizes it on the panel level, and then a central string inverter that converts it to alternating current. Whereas a microinverter is a little clip about the size of a small tablet or a very big iPhone that clips to the back of each panel, and it converts it from DC to AC at the panel level. All right, we have our inverters. I was talking about the panel. How does solar connect to my electric panel? It's a simple connection. Most home electric systems don't need upgrades before going solar, so they're just going to see if you have the amperage that can accommodate it, if it's a newer panel. Installers can do panel upgrades in-house, or if you're more familiar with or if you're more comfortable with an electrician that might be able to do that work, then you can have that panel upgraded before you go solar. But again, most do not require much or any upgrades. So let's talk a little bit about putting all of this terminology together, right? So give you a lot of different terms. Your system size, again, is measured in kilowatts. Again, it's like saying, I have a 10 horsepower generator. The size of your system is measured in kilowatts. And the example below is a 4.2 kilowatt system. You essentially have 6 350 watt panels, 12 350 watt panels multiplied by 12, that's 4,200 watts or 4.2 kilowatt systems. The system size, kilowatts. The energy production is measured in kilowatt hours. So even though they sound similar, they are like apples and oranges. Your kilowatt hours are going to depend upon the system size. A 5 kilowatt system is going to produce typically less kilowatt hours or energy than a 15 kilowatt system. But also it's going to depend on how it's tilted, the angle of orientation, and local shading. The good news is an installer is going to tell you exactly what a system on your home, business, whether it's on the roof or a ground mount, is going to produce. And here you'll see that the average size in Virginia, it's actually 7.5 kilowatts. I was looking at that today, is all of the system size average. But that's what we typically install. And it begs the question, which is probably the most common question that we hear, and it goes something like this. It's like, hey, Aaron, I want to go solar on my home. What size system am I going to need, and how much is it going to cost? And that's a system that that's a question that I can't answer honestly, because I don't know a key thing, and that is how much your annual electricity consumption is. So the first thing an installer is going to do is ask for a copy of your utility bill, and that's going to have your annual electricity consumption, because those things can vary greatly between two houses. You could have 2,000 square feet homes, but have completely different energy usage profiles, whether one heats with gas, one has 2 people living in it, or 5 people living in it. So the most accurate way to get a sense of how much energy you're going to need to produce with solar is by looking at how much you consume. So they're going to say, okay, this is how much you consume. And it's always based on annual production or annual consumption because it's easy to predict. And then the installer might say, hey, well, what are your goals or what's your budget? Or this is something good to have in mind, say, hey, I can only go above a certain budget, or I want to cover 100% of my annual consumption with solar. You don't have to go all or nothing, but it's good to have these things in mind. And again, using the car analogy, before you buy a car, typically you were thinking, these are my needs. This is what I want to do. This is my budget. We encourage you to do the same thing with the solar system. So when you speak to that installer, you can get a good idea. It's kind of like getting a haircut. You don't just sit down in the barber's chair and say, okay, cut my hair. You say, this is what I want to do with this. This is kind of what I'm looking to do. Same thing with solar. And I mentioned before that you don't have to produce all of your solar or all of your energy with solar. And that's because all the systems, with the exception of very few, are grid-tied systems. So they're always plugged into the grid. And I'm going to explain why that relates to excess or how much energy you want to produce in a second. But if we follow the schematic here, solar panels absorb the energy from the sun. They produce direct current electricity. And then number two, that inverter, whether it's a microinverter, a string inverter, or one with an optimizer, it's going to convert that DC to AC, conditions that power so that it's going to be used. And then it flows directly into your home or business. I like to, my colleague Ben kind of characterizes it as the right of first refusal. So that energy that's produced is going to be instantly consumed. Say if, on a nice sunny day like it is here in Richmond, where I'm based, if I had panels where I'm at right now, that would be flowing into my computer, the air conditioning, maybe some lighting. And then anything else is going to be sent back out onto the grid. So if you have a purely grid-tied system with no battery storage, I like to use the example of if you're on vacation for 2 weeks during the summer, you have nothing that's instantaneously using that electricity. What happens? Well, you're spinning your meter backwards. Number 4 is that bidirectional utility meter measures what you use, and then any excess goes back to the grid. And you're going to get a credit for those kilowatt hours that you use or that you produce but don't use. And this is called net metering. So very commonly, you're going to have excess electricity during certain times of the day, which you're spinning meter backwards, or during seasons. And then you're applying that excess balance, again, like rollover minutes, to the energy that you use at night or times of seasons of less production. So again, this is called net metering. It's an incredibly important incentive or billing structure. So just a few points to emphasize: you're going to get a 1-to-1 credit per kilowatt hour. Here in Virginia, we pay roughly about 11 to 12 to 13 cents a kilowatt hour, depending on your utility territory. So anything that you send back to the grid, by law, you get that full credit. You're going to have daily or seasonal surpluses. Again, so if you have a system where you're at work mostly during the day, you might have a surplus during times of that day or during the work week. Or typically in spring and fall, when we don't have a lot of heating or air conditioning needs and kind of clear, cool days, you're going to have some seasonal surpluses that are going to apply to your next month's balance. Again, it's an annual billing cycle, and that's based on when you interconnect your system. So if you connect in say, February, your billing cycle is going to be February to the end of January in that year. And this permits you to have a percentage of annual offset. Remember, you're always connected to the grid. So, even the times when the panels aren't producing, you're going to be getting that electricity from the grid. And it's very common for folks to, size a system to produce 50 all the way up to 100%. And then some people maybe don't have the roof space or the budget to do that much, but they might put a system on and really do some energy efficiency upgrades to maximize their system. And just on the right is a good example of a little bit of some data from a monitoring system based on how many kilowatt hours are produced during the day, during the 7 days. And there's a lot of different ways that that's presented. So again, just a simplification of your electric bill after solar. Let's just say you consume 300 kilowatt hours or units of electricity that month, but you produce 250 kilowatt hours. You're only going to pay for the 50 kilowatt hours of electricity that you purchase from the grid. Or let's just say you produce 350 kilowatt hours. So you produce that 50 kilowatt hours extra. That's going to apply to your next billing cycle. A few other things, there's going to be a fixed connection charge. So even if you produce 100% of your annual electricity, or you produce all of your energy that you need every month from solar, you still pay a connection charge to your utility. Dominion's about $6.58. Some of the electric cooperatives are much higher, but it just depends on how much you or what utility it is. And again, your surpluses are carried over month to month based on your billing cycle, like rollover minutes. And your annual billing cycle is based on your interconnection date, not the calendar date. So if you connect in June, it's going to be from that June into May, not from January to January. All right, so we talked about a grid-tied system. There's a lot of advantages to a grid-tied system. Mainly, it requires less components. But the main disadvantage is if you have a purely grid-tied system and the power goes out, your panels are not going to work. And that's counterintuitive to a lot of people, and that's a safety mechanism. I mentioned before that we send excess electricity out onto the grid. So if there's a grid outage and you're sending excess electricity, you've got live wires and the folks from the utility are out there working on it, that's a safety mechanism. So if you want to have power during an outage, you need battery backup. You can also have solar panels with a gas generator as well, but many people that do solar do batteries. So what's the advantages and disadvantages of battery systems? You might want storage, or what might be your needs, or what might be a good idea if you have frequent utility outages. The previous picture was a picture that I took in Puerto Rico, and we were starting a program there. As I mentioned, we started one, and pretty much everybody does get battery backup in Puerto Rico because the utility outages are so frequent. But what else here in Virginia is necessary if you want to have, or what would be a good idea? Let's say you have critical or essential loads at home, like well pumps. These are things that you really can't afford to do without in the case of an outage, medical equipment, things like that. What we've found throughout most of our work here and in Florida and Puerto Rico is that solar coupled with on-site battery storage is the best way to prepare for an emergency or disaster. The one disadvantage is going to be cost and complexity. So you're adding new components, so you're going to have to weigh that value. And I'm a solar guy, but I will tell you, if you're just looking at dollar per dollar cost effectiveness, right now the state of battery technology in terms of finances, it's actually more cost effective to do a backup gas generator right now. But again, many people opt for battery storage, and the disadvantage of a gas generator, of course, is that it's fossil fuel. We're going to move on to the next slide. All right, and I think Secret will put this in the chat, but we have a battery storage guide. We also have some resources that kind of walk you through the advantages and disadvantages. Frequently asked questions, and then I will pause for any questions. Warranties. The systems do have warranties depending on the component. So your panels are warranted 25 years. They have what's called a linear production warranty and a workmanship warranty. Your inverters, remember, they're going to convert the DC to the alternating current. They have warranties anywhere between 10 to 25 years, depending on the technology. And then what's typical in this area is an installer is going to offer a workmanship warranty for the things like a roof penetration or the things that they work on. And what's common is anywhere between about 5 to 10 years, depending on the installer. Homeowners insurance. You're definitely going to want to tell your homeowner's insurance. You can put it on your policy. It's very rare that you will see a precipitous rise in your premiums. If you do, you might want to look at another provider. Most of the insurance policies out there don't tack on an additional premium. There are still some that are behind the times, really for no reason, in my opinion. So if you do see that, it should be a should be a way for you to think about changing your company. Maintenance. So I mentioned no moving parts. You're going to have that online monitoring system, so it's a good way to monitor your performance. Very little maintenance. In fact, if you have snow on your panels, we do not recommend at all anytime getting up on your roof. We have enough rain here in Virginia that it's going to wash off the pollen or any dust, so require very little maintenance. I mentioned the systems last, they're warranted for 25 years plus, so it's a long-term investment. And moving on to the next one, will HOA allow solar on my home? So we could speak authoritatively to that. We passed a piece of legislation in 2020 that made it illegal for an HOA to impose unreasonable restrictions on your home unless they had a previously declared covenant or declaration in the charter of the HOA. And what that does is put a criteria. If they were to say it's not allowed on the front of your roof, but on the back, if it increases the cost by 5% or more to do that, that's an unreasonable restriction and is illegal. And if it increases the performance of your system by 10% or more, it's unreasonable. So a good example of how Solar United Neighbors and a lot of the folks that we help advocate for these things that make it easier for folks to go solar in the future. And lastly, what if I'm in a historic district? It's typically relegated to line of sight. Really talk to your installer about that. They will typically handle all those permitting procedures. So before I go into installing an EV charger as part of the group, I'm going to ask Sucrit if there's any questions that I can answer.
Go for it. There is one question which I was not able to answer, and I think it's subjective. But Adam wants to know, is there a good rule of thumb for estimating how much a solar installation adds to your home? Is there a specific monetary value or percentage we could use here?
There is some NREL data, and I think we could follow up on their page that does give a quantitative analysis of homes in Mid-Atlantic. I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but essentially, yes, there is correlation between the value. Now, the exact value is going to depend, and I would also add as a caveat, it depends on your market. In places where there's a high premium for, solar, let's just say Northern Virginia, there's maybe an environmental awareness or, values where people are going to see solar panels there, they might pay additionally for that. It again, really depends on your market. I would just say also, the more we learn about panels, it's 25 years lifespan, no moving parts, that's going to take care of, or that's going to reduce, a rising fixed cost. How could they not add value to your home? But I think the simple answer is it really depends on your market. And I think we could follow up with some data. It was a really good question too.
I think that was the only question I was not able to answer. You should be good. And let me try and find that resource on NREL also in the meantime.
Yeah, if you look at it, should be on our HOA page, our subpage for Virginia. Really
Sounds good.
Okay.
Thanks, Aaron.
Thank you. All right, so electric vehicle chargers. We started doing that, I think it was 2018 in Arlington, because what we found is that people that have electric vehicle chargers start to look to solar, and people that have solar start to look at electric vehicles. And that's because you could think of solar as a pretty amazing source of fuel, and it produces electricity. And if you think of all of the things that electricity does, it's pretty amazing. You can heat, cook, cool, run an automobile, keep beer cold. These are important things. But in all seriousness, you are producing a very valuable fuel on your roof. And if you connect that to an electric vehicle, you're basically fueling your vehicle with the energy that you produce on your rooftop. So part of this group, and part of all of our groups moving forward in Virginia, offer electric vehicle chargers as part of the offering. And it's very common now that installers will offer a level 2 EV charger as part of their offerings. So EV chargers are classified based on levels. So chances are you could probably look and see what would accommodate a level 1 charger if you look around your home, and that's a simple 120 volt outlet. They're based on the level of infrastructure. A level 1 is a very simple piece of infrastructure, charges at a lower rate, but a level 2 is actually a little bit higher level of infrastructure. So it's a 240 volt outlet. And that would be similar to your electric range or to a clothes dryer. So it requires a different type of outlet, but it increases that charging speed more than your simple wall outlet. It's up to about 6 times as fast. And depending on the type of vehicle you have, it could add about 10 to 30 plus miles of charge per hour. The typical warranty is about 3 years. And installers will offer different levels, different types of products. So let's talk about some considerations that you should be thinking of before. First and foremost, if you're looking to go with an EV charger, a very simple question is where, based on where you park your vehicle. Is it going to be in the interior like this garage system, or is it going to be an exterior? Where are you going to mount it? Is it going to be on the wall itself or a pedestal, which is a standalone? More importantly, do you have enough electric service? So is that electric service accessible, or are they going to have to run trenching or wiring to access where you park? You might need at least 30 to 50 amps additional capacity in your main electric panel. Things to consider are network capability. So does it connect to the internet? Is it a smart charger? The advantages of a network capable charger is that if it's in a public location, you can monitor who's using it, if it's available. And many utility companies, as they start to roll out what's called time of use pricing for electric vehicles, require network capability for data sharing, but it's up to you. Cord length is really, really important, because there's no worse feeling than just having about a foot of length of cord left to go until you can charge. So the longer the cord, it makes it more versatile, but it also increases the price of the charger. As I mentioned before, public access. So if you're in a public, if it's a commercial property, are you going to make it publicly accessible, or is it just something for employees or, certain members of the public? And aesthetics. And that answers the question, does it look cool? It's going to be something that you're going to put in your home or in your garage. So you're going to want to make sure that the aesthetics comport with what you want to look at every day. And the good news is there's a lot of different types of chargers available. Moving on to the next. Okay, great. So before I get into solar economics, are there any questions about EV chargers?
No questions in the chat. You can carry on.
Great. We're moving at a great clip. We should have you out of here before 1 on your Friday afternoon. So solar pricing, this is really, really important. And again, it's in the spirit of ensuring that you're an informed consumer. Kind of like buying a car, you should know how it's priced, what the long-term investment horizon looks like. So again, most importantly, panels or solar systems are priced by the watt, not by the panel. So you could have a 1 kilowatt system, 1,000 watt systems, whether it's 4 250 watt panels or 333 watt panels, but you're going to pay by the watt. It's kind of like buying an engine based on the horsepower. 250 horsepower, doesn't matter whether it's a 4, 6, or an 8-cylinder engine, you're paying by the horsepower. Same thing with solar. As I mentioned, solar is a long-term investment, so 25-year plus, no moving parts. That's not to say that things won't fail, but it's pretty rare. You have your monitoring, and if you have any challenges, you're going to typically reach out to your installer. What you're doing is hedging against rising utility rates. A very conservative average is that utility electric rates increase about 2 to 3% per year. In Virginia, last time I checked, is a little bit higher. And if you've been paying attention to the news recently, natural gas prices have gone up considerably. So with solar, the price of the sun is not going to rise, so you're hedging against rising utility rates. So if the price of energy doubles in the next 10 years, the value of your solar electricity is going to double. In Virginia, what we see across we've done 47 co-ops, 1,200 installs, we see typically about our average return on investment about 9 to 13 years. You could get a little bit less time if you get a good price or a system that produces a lot, or conversely, maybe you have a higher price or you don't have a great system in terms of production, but that's typical to what we've observed. All right. So this is a lot of information, and I'm going to go over again with, in the spirit of helping you understand the pricing, what your main incentives are, your revenue streams, and how that's going to relate. So what we see are two systems, a 4 kilowatt and an 8 kilowatt system. And again, the way that you calculate your pricing is your system size in kilowatts multiplied by the price per watt. And over the years, we've seen about a $2.75 per watt price in Virginia. So if you multiply the 4 kilowatt system, 4,000 watts times $2.75 a watt, that's an $11,000 system. Same thing if you do that by 8 kilowatts. Important to note that these are turnkey systems. So the installer is going to procure, design, do all the equipment, handle the interconnections for you. So this is, again, a turnkey system where they're going to handle that big thing. Now, your main incentive is going to be, as we talk about revenue streams, I like to talk about, well, you invested in your system, how is it going to pay back so that you can figure out that return on investment? So this is an older slide that happened before the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act passed. It says a 26 federal tax credit. We now have a 30% federal tax credit that's been restored to the value that it was 2 years ago, and we have that for the next 10 years. So federal tax credit, that's if you pay federal taxes. So you have to pay into it and have that federal liability. It's a credit, not a rebate. But just to make the math really easy, if you have a $10,000 system at 30%, you have $3,000. If you end up owing $3,000 in that credit, you're going to pay nothing. Here in this example, on 26% for the 4 kilowatt system, it's $2,860, as well as $5,720 for the 8 kilowatt system. Again, federal tax credit, if you pay federal taxes. Common question, what happens if I was part-time employed this year? I don't have that tax liability. That tax liability can be, or that credit can be rolled over into your forthcoming tax years as well. So on the graph here, you have your net cost. And then we'll go into the other revenue stream. Unfortunately, we don't have a state tax credit. There was one that was approved a few years back, but it was actually never budgeted or allocated. So we just have the federal tax credit. The other main source of revenue is going to be your electricity savings. So the way that you calculate electricity savings is your annual electricity production from your system in kilowatt hours. That's the units that it produces. Multiply that by the rate of electricity that you pay. It could be 12 cents a kilowatt hour, depending on where you're at. And again, this is an example of hedging against the price of rising electricity. So if the cost of electricity doubles in the next 10 years, the value of your electricity savings, what you're producing from solar, you don't have to buy from your utility, is going to double as well. So we see a couple estimates for this 4 kilowatt system. It's about $600, and you'll see how we account for that down below with the asterisk. You'll see the 10-year cumulative systems. And again, what you'll see is lifetime savings over 25 years plus. So your electricity production from solar is going to be a revenue stream. The other one is a solar renewable energy credit, or what's called an SREC. So this is an incentive that's based on your energy production. And solar renewable energy credit, you could think of it for every 1,000 kilowatt hours of electricity that you produce, you get a certificate of SREC. And that has a value based on what's called the Renewable Portfolio Standard, which is the law that dictates utilities have to produce a certain percentage of their electricity from renewable energy or pay a penalty. And so with the Virginia Clean Economy Act passing in 2020, that gave a certain goal for utilities to produce their energy from smaller systems, and it reduces or it results in this SREC credit. Right now, SRECs are valued at about, I've seen anywhere between about $30 to a little less than $50, and a 4 kilowatt system might produce conservatively between 4 to 5 SRECs per year. So we do again give a very conservative estimate. But again, think of it as a production-based energy incentive. That's another revenue stream that helps you pay back your system. It'd be like, your system is a well of water, and for every 1,000 gallons of water that you produce, we'd say, hey, we'll give you one little certificate that has a value that's going to help you pay back your investment. And that's going to vary SRECs, you go through different brokerage firms. We have a pretty extensive SREC sheet that tells you the background of it, gives you a couple, some of the more commonly used brokerage firms here in Virginia. And again, that is going to vary. When I went up solar in November, I did a 3-year plan that you could do different annuities, different lengths, depending on how you want to do it. So again, just to sum up here, your system is priced in the wattage, not by the panels. Your main revenue streams are going to be your 30% federal tax credit, not 26%, your electricity savings, and then your solar renewable energy credit. And what I would just add is that part of this program, we do a lot of work to help you understand your proposals. And this is in the spirit of when you get a proposal from your installer, you know your price per watt, you know how to calculate those revenue streams so that you can question any assumptions. Chances are most installers are pretty right on, but you'll be able to have that knowledge to say, wait a minute, this is a little bit off of what my understanding is, or, have the power to compare apples to apples. So before we start with the what do I do next, I would assume there's probably some questions. There almost always is on this part. So great.
So let's see. There was this one question. It was less to do with financing. Gary is actually looking for specific installers that specialize in installations of smaller systems. And I mean, I can redirect him to our listserv, but off the top of my head, I can't think of like specific companies for this. Do you know anyone, or is a listserv the best?
When you say smaller systems, is there any threshold, or maybe you could type in the chat? I'm sharing my screen, so it's hard to see.
So he's just considering a system that's doing the backup for the well pump, freezer, and furnace fan with batteries, but no mention of the system size in kilowatts.
Yeah, I can't think of anybody off the top of my head, but that's not to say that there isn't. So we can get back on that. It is a good question, right? Like, and in fact, we actually see a lot of that demand in Puerto Rico, where we're working with something just to back up those essential critical loads. So let's see what we can do to get back to him.
Sounds good. No other questions on this section. That's about it.
All right. So great. What do I do next? So probably the easy thing is to join Solar Ready Set Solar. So if you're, you think this is a good fit, like I'll reiterate that there really is no obligation. It costs you nothing to join. It'd be the difference between going solar, off the street or on your own. The difference is that you get a lot of the tools to make the decision. You get connected to a group of people that are going solar in the same boat as you, or maybe have, as well as our support through the process and way to stay connected. So you see the website there, and then we would encourage you to join, or if you know any of your friends and neighbors about the group. And again, what we see a lot of is folks getting proposals but not knowing how to understand them. And again, just to give you the analogy of the car, we're here to help you make an informed decision, whether it, part of this group directly or not. So we're here to help you with that information. So I'd like to, on behalf of Sucrit and Ben, thank you all for spending your lunch hour with us. I think you have some next steps. We're happy to answer any questions. Please help us grow the group. It's somewhat amorphous in terms of the geography. It goes all the way up to Winchester in the northern part of the valley, Upper Valley, and then down to Lexington in the south. So if you know anybody that would be interested, apart from yourself, we're really joining the group. We're interested in joining the group. We're about 22 people right now. We've had 2 people sign contracts, and we'd love to have more. So again, thank you, and we look forward to being in touch.